In the late 19th century, a teenage boy from the Jharkhand forests managed to destabilize a regional outpost of the British Empire by weaponizing his community's intimate knowledge of the landscape. Birsa Munda was born around 1875 in the village of Vanjari. He spent his early years entirely immersed in the rhythms of this forest environment. To the Munda people, the land was not a resource to be measured or sold. They viewed the rivers and trees as a maternal force that provided everything needed to survive. Birsa developed a profound personal connection to these specific, ancient, towering ecosystems, viewing the survival of the trees as inseparable from his own. This bond with nature was a literal lifeline. If the Munda were separated from their soil, their entire world would cease to exist. That connection was severed when British colonial forces arrived. They brought a rigid, militaristic order to the forest, viewing the landscape only as profit. The invaders enforced new property laws to seize indigenous land, clearing the ancient forests to feed the imperial demand for timber. These were clashing philosophies. On one side, the Munda's circular loop of coexistence. On the other, the British model of top-down, linear extraction. As this industrial model overrode their traditions, the villagers lost their homes and spiritual foundation, creating a void of deep desperation. The logging and land grabs were a direct assault on the Munda way of life. Left with no other options, the community began to organize a defensive response. Birsa stepped forward to lead, but he didn't start by calling for a physical fight. He began with a cultural revival. He used traditional guru mantras and folk songs to reach the villagers, using these familiar sounds to remind them of the shared heritage that the colonial laws were erasing. As his influence grew, Birsa made a specific choice regarding his role. He explicitly refused to be treated as a messiah or a lone savior. He took the name Dharti Abba, or Father of the Earth. This title redirected the movement's focus away from his own personality and toward the singular goal of protecting the land. By anchoring the resistance to the earth itself, Birsa turned scattered village grievances into a collective identity. The struggle was no longer about following one man. It was about defending their mother. When the British attempted to suppress this awakening through legal force, Birsa realized that peaceful rhetoric would no longer be enough. He shifted the movement toward an armed struggle. The Munda people turned the forest into a weapon. They used their lifelong knowledge of the hills and thickets to create a disorienting maze for the British soldiers who tried to follow them. Armed with traditional bows and arrows, tir Tyrone, they launched surprise attacks from the dense cover, effectively neutralizing the advantage of the British rifles. This wasn't a war of conquest. Birsa's objective was to give his people the agency to protect their own territory and keep their traditions intact. He had taken a spiritual connection to the forest and forged it into a tactical wall that a massive empire found nearly impossible to breach. The conflict reached its peak in 1900, during a massive final confrontation between the Munda fighters and the colonial military. Birsa was eventually captured. The British believed that by imprisoning the leader, they would finally break the momentum of the uprising. Birsa died in captivity shortly after his arrest. He was only 25 years old. The colonial administration assumed his death would mark the end of the resistance, but they had underestimated how deeply his ideas had already taken root. The British expected the movement to vanish, but the intensity of the rebellion forced a massive policy shift. the colonial government realized they could no longer ignore the Munda's claim to their land. By 1908, this pressure forced the passing of the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act, which legally restricted the transfer of tribal land to outsiders. Even though the central leader had faded, the interconnected network of the people had secured a permanent protection for their soil. This legislative victory ensured Birsa Munda's name remained a permanent fixture in the history of indigenous rights and ecological defense in India. His life demonstrated that when a community's resistance is built on a genuine love for their land, no military force or imperial law can permanently suppress them.